Skyblocker is what would happen if Jenga and Tetris had a baby and sent it off to a competitive challenge. Because Skyblocker is a 3D puzzler with online leaderboards that really tests A, how precise and speedy you are, but B, whether or not you can build things up in an architectural way and not fudge it up. I found this game incredibly addictive. I'm not very good at it, so apologies in advance for the gameplay footage, but at least I'm honest when I know that it's a skill problem for me rather than a skill problem for the game. And the gameplay footage you see here will clearly show it's a skill problem for me. In Skyblocker, you are starting off with a 3x3 base foundation grid, and you have blocks of all different shapes and sizes lining up for you to then place down. You can rotate it around using the D-pad on your controller or spin it around using your bumper buttons on your controller to whatever orientation it is that you want. And you can take as long as you want to. But whenever you're then placing that block down, it kind of drops in from a certain height. And so you need to make sure that if you're lining up blocks and you've already kind of started to build your way up, that things are going to slot in nicely, because it will start to do a shade of like light blue when it thinks it's going to start clipping and hitting things that's already existing. You need to think about how you can build up blocks in a way that keeps that 3x3 surface area as stable and intact as possible for as long as possible, because as you build up in Skyblocker, weather effect starts to play, and so wind becomes an issue as you start to get like above 50 blocks. And so if you've started to build slightly wonkily and you're moving off to the side, that wind will start to wobble the blocks and they'll start to fall off, and you only get a certain amount of block faults before the game becomes over. You also can't afford to just fanny about with it either if you're looking for online leaderboard success, because there's a multiplier that will go up over and over time that will slowly drain if you take too long going through all of the different blocks that you want to put in and kind of slot it into the right shape. And your multiplier will be lost entirely if you get a block fault. And so what you're trying to do is build at speed but precisely, while still trying to maintain as big a surface area as possible, because you know you're onto a hiding to nowhere when you're stuck with a really narrow slot trying to get like single blocks or a line of 3 blocks in a line all together and being like, I can make it work, I can make it work. And then all of a sudden it will give you like a massive star block and you're like, oh. And it starts to kind of wobble off to the side and then fall off everywhere. If you start to rush or if you make a fudged move, it really starts to bugger you up. And this is the fun of Skyblocker, is that sometimes you just think, oh, come on, I can make it. I can still keep going. But you know some of the problems that you've caused earlier on may come back to haunt you later on as the tile starts to wobble and your sky block starts to crumble and fall over. There's a couple of different modes in Skyblocker, and you've got the kind of main one, which is where you've got the online leaderboards, and it's about timing and speed as well as precision. If that stresses you out, you can then flip to Zen mode, which you can then choose a 3x3, 4x4 or 5x5 grid, and then it will give you totally different blocks depending on which size of grid you've gone for, so that you can kind of get used to, okay, how do I solve these different situations and scenarios? And I found that very helpful to make me get better over time. The more different blocks that you put down, you start to unlock different environments around you for aesthetic pleasing roles, and also different types of blocks that you can then choose to change the block type for when you go into the game itself. I didn't notice that any of the cosmetic changes for the blocks actually changed any of the physics of the blocks, for example, so it's more just from an aesthetically pleasing perspective that you're unlocking all of these things for. I only have one complaint about Skyblocker, and it's the camera. It never stops moving, and it's deeply frustrating when you're desperately trying to be precise, dropping or slotting in blocks into a very specific location in your tower, but the camera just won't stop moving, and so you're then having to wrestle it around with the right analog stick to try and be like, right, get into this position, do this, do that, and then as soon as you stop moving the camera into position, it starts moving away again, and I was like, stop it. And so I dearly love the option to be able to turn that off. But I don't know if that then affects like the pure difficulty of this game by having that option, and does that then require, I don't know, a different leaderboard or something like that? Because actually part of the trick of Skyblocker is trying to wrestle with that camera so that you actually drop something in the right place. So yeah, Skyblocker looks really simple on the surface, but it's oddly addictive, and it's like competitive Jenga Tetris with online leaderboards, and it's a competitive puzzle game I didn't know I wanted until I started playing. So 2 definite thumbs up from me, and I hope to see some more expanded modes in this perhaps in the future, and maybe some tweaks to that camera, pretty please.